I was sitting at a table. Across from me was a woman I had been with for 7 months. She was looking at me the way you look at furniture. Not with anger, not with hate, with nothing. And I remember thinking, what did I do wrong? I had done everything right. I showed up. I was kind. I was there every single time she needed me. I gave her all of me. And she felt nothing. That night, I asked her what changed. She thought for a long time. Then she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "Nothing changed. I just finally saw you clearly." That sentence broke something in me, because it meant the problem was never what I did. It was what I was broadcasting, what I was putting into the room without knowing it. And it took me years to understand what she meant. This video is about that moment, that exact moment when a man stops being someone a woman desires and becomes just another one. Another face, another voice, another option she can walk away from without feeling a thing. And the reason almost no man ever understands this is simple. It does not happen loudly. There is no argument, no betrayal, no single event you can point to and say, there, that is where it ended. It happens in the silence between moments, in the tiny signals your body sends before your mind even knows it is sending them. And by the time you notice, it is already done. Now. For several months, a social psychologist conducted one of the most unusual studies ever recorded in the field of human desire. He spent months inside environments where desire was supposed to be fake, where women were paid, where emotion was not part of the transaction. And what he found was the opposite of what every man believes. He found that desire cannot be turned off, not even in those rooms, not even when it should not exist at all. And the men who triggered it, the men who made these women feel something real, were not the richest. They were not the most handsome. They were not the loudest or the most confident in the way we think confidence looks. They were something else entirely. Something most men will never understand, because it has nothing to do with what you do. It has everything to do with what you are, underneath, in the part of yourself that you do not show anyone, especially not yourself. This study is the heart of this video. But I am not going to rush to it, because if I just hand you the answer, you will forget it by tomorrow. You have heard versions of this before. You have watched videos that tell you to be confident, be mysterious, stop trying so hard, and none of it worked. Why? Because those videos gave you the what. They never gave you the why. They never showed you the mechanism, the actual biological and psychological engine that runs underneath every interaction you have ever had with a woman. That is what we are going to do today, step by step, layer by layer, until you can see it the way these researchers saw it, the way those women felt it. I want you to understand something before we go further. I am not here to teach you how to manipulate anyone. I am not here to give you tricks or lines or techniques. I am here to show you something that most men spend their entire lives blind to. A truth about themselves, about what they are already doing, without choosing to, without even knowing. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It changes how you walk into a room. It changes how you hold yourself when no one is watching. It changes who you become. Not because I told you to change, but because now you finally understand why you are losing. And a man who understands why he is losing, for the first time, has a choice. Most men never get that choice. They just keep losing, quietly, invisibly, until one day, like me, they are sitting across from a woman who looks at them and feels nothing. I do not want that to be you. So here is what is going to happen in this video. We are going to start with the invisible system that ranks men before a single word is spoken. Then we are going to enter the study. And we are going to find out exactly what these women felt and why. But here is the part that broke the researchers. The men at the very top of that invisible ranking were not doing what you think they were doing. Stay with me. Here is the first thing you need to understand. Every time you walk into a space where a woman is present, something happens. Something immediate. Something you have no control over. You are ranked. Not by what you say. Not by how you look. Not by your money or your job or your height. You are ranked by what your body is already broadcasting. Before you open your mouth. Before she consciously registers you. Before either of you knows the other exists. It takes less than a second. And by the time that second is over, you have already been placed somewhere on an invisible scale. High value. Mid-value. Invisible. And the brutal truth is, most men spend their entire lives sitting at the bottom of that scale without ever knowing there is a scale at all. Think about that for a moment. There is a ranking system running in every room you have ever entered, and you have been scored your whole life, and nobody told you. Now, how does this ranking work? It is not complicated, but it is invisible. And that is why it is so dangerous. A woman's nervous system is constantly reading signals, not words, signals, the speed of your movements, the way you hold your shoulders, the rhythm of your breathing, the direction of your eyes, the amount of space you take up or collapse into, all of it. Robert Cialdini spent decades studying how humans make instant judgments about other humans. He found that these judgments are not random. They follow patterns, deep, ancient, biological patterns. Patterns that existed long before language did. And one of those patterns is this. The nervous system of any person, male or female, is wired to detect threat levels, to scan for danger. And in the context of desire, a woman's nervous system is scanning for something specific. It is scanning for evidence of internal stability, not confidence the way you see it in movies, not bravado, not loud energy, internal stability. The quiet signal that says, this person is not going to fall apart. This person is not desperate. This person does not need me to feel okay. And here is where Sun Tzu becomes relevant in a way that will surprise you. Sun Tzu wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." Most people read that as a military strategy, but apply it to desire. The men who win, who actually trigger real attraction, are not the ones fighting for attention. They are not the ones working hardest to be noticed. They are the ones who have already won before the fight begins. They walk in, and the room adjusts to them. Not because they demanded it, because their presence alone communicated something that cannot be faked. Now, let me show you what this looks like in practice, because theory without a story is just words. Thomas was 29. He worked in finance, average build, not ugly, not stunning. The kind of man you would forget in a crowd. He walked into a networking event on a Tuesday night. He did not arrive early. He did not scan the room looking for someone to talk to. He walked in, ordered a drink, and stood near the wall. He did not smile at everyone. He did not introduce himself to every group. He stood still. He listened. When someone spoke to him, he looked at them directly. Not desperately. Not eagerly. He just looked. And here is what happened. Within 40 minutes, 3 different women had found reasons to approach him. Not because he was the most attractive man in the room. He was not. But something about the way he occupied space made him impossible to ignore. One woman later said she could not explain it. She said, he just felt solid, like he was not trying to be anything. That is the signal. That is what the nervous system picks up. That is what sits at the top of the invisible ranking. And the men at the bottom? the ones who become invisible, they are doing the opposite. They are filling the room with noise. They are trying. And the trying is visible. It is loud. And it pushes the very thing they want further away. Now, I want to be clear. Thomas was not performing. He was not following a script. He had simply reached a point in his own life where he did not need the room to validate him. And that internal state radiated outward without him doing a single thing. That is the difference between the top and the bottom of that ranking. It is not behavior, it is state. And the study we are about to enter spent months trying to understand exactly what that state is and how men lose it. But the first thing the researchers found will surprise you, because it has nothing to do with what men were doing wrong. It has everything to do with what they were doing right. Now we enter the study. For months, this researcher did something almost no psychologist would dare to do. He spent his days inside environments where desire was supposed to be transactional, where women were paid to provide a service, where real emotion was not supposed to exist. He did this for one reason. He wanted to isolate the variable. In a normal relationship, everything is mixed together. Looks, money, history, shared experiences, social pressure. You can never tell which factor is actually driving the attraction. It is impossible to separate. But in these environments, the transaction strips everything away. The money is equal. The service is identical. The setting is the same for every man who walks through the door. So if desire still shows up, if a woman still feels something real despite being paid not to, then the cause has to come from the man himself, from something he is doing or being that triggers it. And that is exactly what happened. The researcher interviewed over 400 women. He recorded their responses. He watched their body language during interactions. He cross-referenced what the women said they felt with how the men actually behaved. And the data told a story that contradicted almost everything men believe about attraction. Here is the first finding. And listen carefully, because this is where most men go wrong. The men who generated the most genuine desire were not the ones who were most present. They were not the ones who gave the most attention. They were not the ones who tried the hardest to connect. They were the ones who gave the least. Not because they were cold, not because they were playing games, but because their attention was genuinely elsewhere. They had lives that mattered to them more than the interaction they were in. And the women could feel that. Instantly. One woman described it this way. She said a man walked in one evening who barely looked at her for the first 10 minutes. He was calm. He was on his own timeline. And she said, "I felt something I almost never feel in this work. I felt curious about him. Not attracted yet. Curious." That is the critical distinction. Desire does not begin with attraction. It begins with curiosity. And curiosity is only triggered by the unknown. The moment a man makes himself fully known, fully available, fully transparent, fully eager, curiosity dies. And when curiosity dies, desire never begins. Robert Greene understood this principle deeply. In his work on power and strategy, he wrote about the importance of appearing less than you are. Not as deception, as protection of your own mystery. Greene observed that the most influential people in history were rarely the most visible ones. They controlled what others could see. They kept parts of themselves hidden. And that hiddenness made them magnetic. Apply that to desire. The men in this study who kept something back, not deliberately, but naturally, because they were genuinely engaged with their own inner world, were the ones who made women lean forward instead of pulling away. And here is where the pattern becomes clear. The researcher noticed something he called the just another one threshold. It is the point at which a man crosses from being someone a woman might feel something toward, to being someone she can completely dismiss. And every single man who crossed that threshold did the same thing. They made themselves too easy to read. Not in one moment, not in one conversation, but over time, through repeated signals, they showed everything. Their needs, their fears, their hunger for approval, their willingness to reshape themselves based on her reactions. And once a woman could see all of that, once there was nothing left to discover, the man became invisible, not hated, not resented, just gone. The way background noise disappears when you stop paying attention to it. Elijah was one of the men the researcher observed closely. Elijah was generous. He was thoughtful. He brought gifts. He remembered details about the women he visited. By any normal standard, he was doing everything right. But every woman who interacted with Elijah reported the same thing. They felt comfortable with him, they appreciated him, and they felt absolutely nothing. The researcher asked one woman to explain it. She paused for a long time. Then she said, "He is like warm water. You do not feel it. It is just there. Warm water." That is what happens when a man gives everything away too fast. He becomes the temperature of the room, present but unfelt. And Elijah had no idea he was doing it. That is the trap. The men who fall into invisibility are almost always the men who are trying the hardest to be seen. But the study did not stop there. What they found in the second phase will change how you see every interaction you have ever had. The second phase of the study changed everything. In the first phase, the researcher studied what the women felt. In the second phase, he studied why they felt it. He brought in behavioral analysts. He recorded micro-expressions. He tracked physiological responses, heart rate, skin conductivity, pupil dilation. And what they found was not psychological. It was biological. The women were not choosing to feel attracted to certain men. Their bodies were doing it automatically, before their conscious minds were even involved. The signal that triggered it was not words. It was not charm. It was not confidence the way we talk about confidence. It was a single, unified signal that the researcher called internal coherence. Internal coherence, 2 words, and they explain everything. Here is what it means. Every human being sends out dozens of signals at once. The way they hold their body, the pace of their speech, the direction of their eyes, the tension in their muscles, the rhythm of their breath. In most men, these signals contradict each other. A man says something casual, but his hands are trembling. He holds eye contact, but his shoulders are curled inward. He smiles, but the smile does not reach his eyes. Women's nervous systems are incredibly sensitive to this. They evolved to be. In a world where men held physical power, a woman's survival depended on her ability to read a man's true internal state. Not what he said, what he actually was. And when those signals contradict, when the outside says one thing and the inside says another, the nervous system registers it as a threat. Not a physical threat, a value threat. The signal says, this man does not trust himself. This man is afraid. This man is not safe to invest in. And desire shuts off. Instantly. Automatically. Without the woman making a conscious decision. But when the signals align, when the outside and the inside say the exact same thing, the nervous system registers it as something rare, something worth paying attention to, something worth moving toward. That is internal coherence, and it is the single most powerful driver of desire that this study found. Now, this is where Machiavelli enters, and I want you to pay close attention because this is not a name to drop. This is a framework to understand. Niccolo Machiavelli spent his life studying power. Not abstract power, real power. The kind that moves people, the kind that makes men follow without being told to, the kind that makes rooms shift when someone enters. In The Prince, he wrote something that most people misread. He wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." Everyone reads that as cruelty. It is not. What he was describing is exactly what this study found 400 years later. The difference between a man whose signals are coherent and a man whose signals are not. The man who is feared, not hated, feared, is the man whose internal state is so stable, so unified, so unshakable that people can feel it in his presence. You do not need to understand why you feel it. You just feel it. The way you feel the weight of a building when you stand next to one. The man who is loved, in the shallow way he meant, is the man who is trying to be loved, who is soft where he should be firm, who bends to avoid conflict, whose signals say, "Please accept me." And his point was this: if you build yourself around being accepted, you will never command the kind of respect that makes real loyalty or real desire possible. Because respect comes before desire. Always. In every case. Without exception. A woman can love a man she does not respect, but she will never desire him. Not deeply. Not in the way that keeps her awake at night. Not in the way that makes her think about him when she is supposed to be thinking about anything else. Desire requires something that feels almost dangerous. A sense that this man has a world inside him that she cannot fully access. That he is not performing for her. That his existence does not depend on her response. That is internal coherence. That is what he was pointing at. And that is what the study confirmed across 400 interactions. The men who had it did not have to work for desire. It arrived on its own. Like heat from a fire. You do not chase heat. You just stand near the fire. The men who did not have it could not earn desire no matter what they did. Because desire is not earned, it is triggered. And the trigger is not effort, it is state. Now you understand what kills a man's value. The contradiction inside him. The gap between who he shows the world and who he actually is underneath. But understanding it and escaping it, those are two completely different wars. Before I show you the 3 behaviors that destroy a man's value, I need to be honest about something. Most of what I am about to describe, I did all of it. Every single one. For years. And I had no idea. That is the nature of this trap. The men who fall into it are not weak men. They are not careless men. They are men who genuinely believe they are doing the right thing. Men who think that being available, being open, being emotionally present is what women want. And on the surface, it looks like it should be. In movies, in songs, in every story we are told about love, the man who gives everything is the hero. But desire does not live on the surface. It lives underneath. And underneath, the rules are completely different. Carl Jung spent decades studying the hidden layers of the human psyche. He called the parts of ourselves that we refuse to see, the parts we bury, deny, or hide, the shadow. Jung's insight was this: the shadow does not disappear when you ignore it. It leaks out, through your behavior, through your energy, through the signals your body sends when your conscious mind is looking the other way. And the 3 behaviors I am about to describe are shadow behaviors. They are the moments when a man's buried insecurity leaks into the open, and a woman feels it before she understands it. The first death move is the validation loop. This is when a man's entire emotional state becomes dependent on a woman's responses. When she texts back, he feels alive. When she does not, he spirals. When she seems less interested, he doubles down. More messages, more effort, more presence. Ryan was a man I knew for years. He was intelligent. He was funny when he was relaxed. But the moment he was interested in a woman, something shifted in him. He became a reader. He would analyze every message she sent. He would ask mutual friends what she was thinking. He would adjust his entire personality based on what he thought she wanted to see. And here is the thing. Ryan did not know he was doing it. He genuinely believed he was just being attentive, being interested. But every woman he pursued felt the same thing. They felt watched. They felt like their reactions were being monitored. And that feeling, the feeling of being someone's emotional weather system, is one of the fastest ways to kill desire. Baltasar Gracian, the 17th century Spanish philosopher, wrote something that applies here with surgical precision. He said, "Do not be the first nor the last in anything notable." What Gracian understood was that extremes draw the wrong kind of attention. The man who is desperately eager and the man who is coldly indifferent are both visible for the wrong reasons. The man who holds the center, who is present but not hungry, is the one who draws the right kind of notice. The second death move is the mirror. This is when a man reshapes himself to match whoever he is with. He adopts her interests. He mirrors her opinions. He becomes whoever she seems to want him to be. It feels like empathy. It feels like connection. But it is actually the opposite. Because when you become a mirror, you stop being a person. You become a reflection. And no one desires a reflection. You cannot fall in love with your own image staring back at you. There is nothing there to discover. Elijah, the same man from the study, was a mirror. He was so skilled at becoming what others wanted that women genuinely enjoyed his company. But none of them ever felt that pull, that need to see him again. Because every time they looked at him, they were just seeing themselves. The third death move is the collapse. This is the most dangerous one. It is when a man lets a woman see him fall apart, not vulnerability in the way that builds trust. Real collapse, emotional collapse. The moment when rejection or uncertainty causes him to lose his composure entirely. To beg, to plead, to show her that his inner world is completely unstable without her in it. This is where Jung's shadow fully emerges. The man believes he is being honest. He believes he is showing her how much she means to him. But what he is actually showing her is that he cannot hold himself together. And once a woman sees that, once she knows that her leaving would cause that kind of damage, she will leave faster, not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. Because no one wants to be responsible for another person's collapse. You now know what to stop. But stopping is not enough. The men who actually escaped these patterns, the men who rebuilt their value from nothing, they did something far more dangerous than just cutting out bad habits. They burned the ground down. That is the only way to describe what the men who actually escaped did. They did not tweak their behavior. They did not add a few good habits on top of the old ones. They dismantled the foundation, and they built something entirely new underneath. And I need to explain why, because most men will not do this. Most men want a shortcut. They want 3 tips. They want something they can try this weekend and see results by Monday. This is not that, and the reason it is not that is because of something Daniel Kahneman discovered about how the human mind works. Kahneman showed that the human brain is deeply resistant to abandoning anything it has already invested in. Time, emotion, identity. Once you have poured yourself into something, your mind will fight to protect it even when it is clearly destroying you. He called this the sunk cost bias, and it is the reason why most men stay trapped in the exact patterns that are making them invisible. Think about it. If you have spent years being the man who gives everything, the man who is always available, always accommodating, always eager, then changing that feels like a betrayal of yourself. It feels like admitting that everything you have done was wrong. And most men would rather keep losing quietly than face that feeling. But the men who escaped, they faced it, head on. And what happened next was not comfortable. But it worked. The first thing they did was physical. And I do not mean they joined a gym and got big muscles. I mean they changed the way they lived in their own bodies. They slowed down. They stopped rushing through days. They ate with attention. They moved with purpose. They stopped treating their body like a vehicle that carried their brain from place to place and started treating it like the primary instrument through which the world perceives them. Because here is what the study confirmed. The body is not separate from the signal. The body is the signal. And a body that is rushed, tense, collapsed, and reactive broadcasts all of that instantly. The men who rebuilt started by rebuilding the body first. Not for aesthetics, for coherence, for the alignment between inside and outside that we talked about earlier. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who was once enslaved, understood this principle at the deepest level. He taught that the only thing truly within your control is your own response to the world, not what happens to you, not how others see you, how you hold yourself when the world is pressing against you. And when a man masters that, when he can stay steady while everything around him is shaking, that steadiness becomes visible. It becomes felt, without him saying a word about it. Marcus Aurelius built on this same foundation. He wrote in his private journals he never intended anyone to read, about the practice of returning to your own center, again and again, every time you drift, every time the outside world pulls you off your axis. Aurelius was not writing about desire. He was writing about self-mastery. But self-mastery is the soil from which everything else grows, including the kind of presence that makes a man impossible to ignore. The second thing these men did was psychological. They severed the feedback loop. They stopped measuring their worth by how women responded to them. Not because they stopped caring about connection, but because they understood that as long as a woman's reaction was the thing that determined whether they felt okay, they would never achieve internal coherence. You cannot be stable if your stability depends on someone else's approval. So they built something else to stand on. A purpose, a direction. Something that mattered to them more than being desired. Julian was one of the men tracked in a follow-up to the study. He had been, by his own admission, one of the most invisible men in the original research. Women found him pleasant, forgettable, warm water. Julian spent 8 months doing exactly what I just described. He rebuilt his body. He severed the feedback loop. He found work that demanded everything from him mentally. He stopped tracking how women responded to him because he simply stopped caring enough to track it. And then, about 9 months later, he went back to the same environment where the original study had taken place. The researcher watched. Julian walked in. He did not scan the room. He did not perform. He simply moved through the space the way someone moves through their own home. Within 20 minutes, 2 women had approached him independently. Not because he was beautiful, not because he was rich, because he had become someone who did not need the room. And the room could feel it. There is one principle that ties all of this together, and it is the final piece. The principle is this: you cannot become the man women desire by trying to become the man women desire. Read that again, because it sounds like a contradiction, but it is not. It is the most important sentence in this entire video. The moment desire becomes your goal, the moment you are building yourself around the idea of being attractive, you have already destroyed the one thing that makes attraction possible. Because attraction is not a reward for effort. It is a response to state, and the state that triggers it is a state that has nothing to do with women. It is a state of being complete, on your own, without needing anything from outside yourself to feel whole. Machiavelli understood this, and this is where his work connects to the study in a way that almost no one has ever seen. Remember what he wrote: "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." Machiavelli was not telling men to be cruel. He was telling them to be whole, to be so internally unified that the people around them could feel the weight of that wholeness. And from that weight, from that presence, real influence followed. Real loyalty followed. Real desire followed. Not as a goal, as a consequence. Because when a man is genuinely whole, when his signals are coherent, when his body and his mind and his sense of self are all saying the same thing, he does not need to chase anything. The things he wants come to him. Not because the world is fair, because the signal he is sending is irresistible to the nervous systems of everyone around him. That is the final weapon, not a technique, not a behavior, a state of being. And here is the uncomfortable truth that most self-improvement content will never tell you. This transformation is not about women. It never was. The study used women and desire as the lens because that is where the signal is most visible. Women's nervous systems are extraordinarily sensitive to male coherence. They can feel it in a room before a single conversation happens, so the research could measure it, could prove it, could show exactly what triggers it and what destroys it. But the transformation itself, the work of becoming internally coherent, that is not something you do for a woman. You do it for yourself. Because a man who is fragmented, who is running on validation, who collapses when the world does not applaud him, that man is suffering every single day, whether or not a woman is in his life. Friedrich Nietzsche spent his life demanding that people stop living for external approval and start becoming who they actually are. He wrote, "Become who you are, not who others want you to be, not who earns the most praise, who you actually are, underneath all the performance, underneath all the conditioning, underneath all the years of learning to be what the room wanted. That is the real work, and it is the hardest work a man can do, because it requires letting go of the one thing most men cling to the tightest, the belief that if they just try harder, if they just do enough, someone will finally see them. But no one can see you if you cannot see yourself. And that brings me back to the beginning. Remember the woman I told you about at the very start? The one who looked at me across the table and felt nothing? She said, "I just finally saw you clearly." I spent years hating that sentence. I spent years believing it meant I was not enough. But now I understand what she actually saw. She saw the contradiction. She saw a man who was saying one thing with his words and another thing with everything else. She saw a man who was performing wholeness while falling apart underneath. And she could not desire that man, not because he was broken, but because the break was visible. I am not that man anymore. Not because I learned the right lines, not because I found the right technique, but because I did the work. The quiet, invisible, unglamorous work of becoming someone whose inside and outside say the same thing. And I am telling you this not to impress you. I am telling you this because you might be sitting where I was sitting, across from someone who feels nothing, or alone, wondering why the effort never seems to be enough. It is not about the effort. It was never about the effort. It is about the state. And the state can be built. Anyone can build it. But only if you are willing to stop chasing and start becoming. That is what this channel is about. Not tricks. Not shortcuts. the real psychology of power, desire, and self-mastery. The kind of understanding that changes not just how women see you, but how you see yourself. If this is the kind of truth you have been looking for, the kind that goes deeper than anything else you have watched, then the shadow mind is where it lives. Subscribe, because we are just getting started.